On May 16th, 2011, a lady's body was found in a water tank at the top of an HDB that provided water to 700 residents in Singapore. This is the story of a 30-year-old Indonesian maid called Mrs. Rulawati who was living in Singapore with the family that she was looking after. Back in Indonesia, she had a husband and a 4-year-old child, of which it is assumed she was supporting, and that is why she was working in Singapore. They would later find her lifeless body in the water tank in the very building where she worked and lived. So what happened? The police are the ones who found her body after a call that was made by a cleaner who had reported suspicious behavior coming from one of his colleagues. That must have been some hunch. Some people had also reported hearing fighting in the early hours of the morning and also blood located in one of the lifts. This colleague was believed to have known Mrs. Rulawati, and I believe he was arrested and charged with her murder that very day. His name was Muhammad Ripon Mustafa, who was 29 years old and was originally from Bangladesh. He was actually working as a maintenance worker in the same building since 2005. This is obviously how they were both acquainted, and it was said that they would exchange smiles together. Over time, it was found out that they were actually having an affair together. Mohammed had told police that on the day of Rulawati's death, she'd forced him to take her to the rooftop, where she wanted him to commit suicide with her. They would first go on to have sex, and a short while after, she would try and drown herself in the water tank. Muhammad would try and stop her, but he backed off after she tried to cut him with the knife. I guess at this point, this is where he left, and she continued to try and drown herself, and she ultimately succeeded. The forensic pathologist had also backed up the idea that she could have drowned herself. They had also found stab wounds on her back, which again could have been self-inflicted. I guess his story was compelling enough for them to actually later discharge him and rule this as an actual suicide. Now let's go back to the water tank. Remember, I noted 700 residents use this tank for their everyday water? Well, the residents were pretty pissed off. They were really pissed off because the authorities failed to tell them right away about the body located in the tank. They actually decided to let them know that it was routine maintenance work. But of course, word got out very quickly that this wasn't just ordinary routine. I mean, how could they explain a body being carried out or police surrounding the area? This information would have got out sooner or later. The authorities finally cleaned the water pipes and sterilized all of it, which meant the residents could now have access to their water again. But of course, for many residents, they were still not happy with this resolution. I mean, the only way to resolve this is to remove the entire water tank, right? Well, that's exactly what the residents called for, and eventually they did replace the water tank, I think a month or two after the incident. There was also a major concern around how easily accessible those water tanks were, and I guess they were easily accessible to Mohammed because he was a maintenance worker there, so that kind of makes sense. But moving forward, the authorities have brought in better measurements around securing the water tanks and only allowing certain individuals to be able to access those tanks. I do have a lot of questions around this case. He spoke about her being suicidal. She wanted to commit suicide, and I don't really understand why he would leave her there. Why didn't he call for help or call the police? She also had a 4-year-old boy back at home. Did suicide prevail over this? I'm not sure. And of course, there are many cases in Singapore where maids have committed suicide, so it's not completely unusual for this type of thing to occur. But at the same time, it's extremely sad when anything like this does happen. My thoughts do go out to her family, and may she rest in peace. My thoughts, of course, also go out to the residents who have had to suffer this traumatic ordeal.